They slapped the cuffs on me right there on my own porch. Two guys in uniforms, so cheap, they looked like they came out of Halloween bin. Badges that wouldn't fool a mall cop. And behind them, like she was directing the whole play, stood my neighbor, Linda Harrow. Thin smile, hands folded behind her back, chin tilted like a drill sergeant. "You're under arrest for violation of community bylaws," she said, loud enough so half the street could hear. I've been in handcuffs before, but always on the other side of them, leading raids, chasing dealers, facing rifles in the dark. But standing there accused like some criminal because my trash can sat out too long, that was a new kind of low. Now, if you're wondering how a retired cop like me ended up in that mess, let me take you back to the beginning. The day I first moved on to Maple Glen Drive, I thought I'd finally found peace. After 20 years in law enforcement, 15 of those with SWAT, I was worn thin. My knees popped every time it rained. My back reminded me daily of all the doors I'd kicked, and the sound of sirens still rattled through my sleep. All I wanted was quiet, and Maple Glen seemed to promise exactly that. The oaks leaned across the road like old guardians. The houses were modest but warm, shutters just faded enough to look lived in. Within an hour of unpacking, the neighbor across the street, Hank Calloway, lumbered over with a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Welcome to the block," he said with a grin. Later that evening, the Morales family brought cookies, their kids chasing each other through my driveway while we made small talk on the porch. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was arriving. For 3 golden weeks, life was simple. Coffee on the porch in the mornings, tinkering in the garage without a radio squawking in my ear, evenings spent watching Hank fight with his lawnmower while Mrs. Morales watered her flower beds. And yet, old habits die hard. I still caught myself checking exits in grocery stores, noting cars that circled the block too many times. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself peace had finally found me. I was wrong. It started with a red slip under my wiper blade. I thought it was a pizza flyer until I read the bold letters at the top. Notice of violation. Maple Glen Homeowners Association. My eyebrows shot up. I had specifically bought this house because the realtor swore there was no HOA. The violation? My lawn was a 1/4 inch too tall. $50 fine. Pay in 10 days. I laughed. My yard was cut straighter than a Marine haircut. Figured it was a clerical mistake. The next morning, another red slip. Trash cans visible too long after pickup. $75 fine. That one hit different. The truck had just passed an hour before. As I stood in the driveway reading it, I felt that old familiar tingle on the back of my neck, being watched. When I looked up, I swore I saw a curtain twitch across the street. Linda Harrow's window. Later, Hank came over shaking his head. "She's been at it for months. My wife paid $200 just to shut her up. Calls herself HOA president, but nobody remembers voting for her." He pointed at the slip in my hand. "All those signatures, that's her handwriting." That night, I laid the red slips out on my kitchen table like pieces of evidence. And in a way, they were. I'd seen this before, on street corners, in gang-run neighborhoods. It always starts small. A tax here, a fee there. Once people start paying, the demands never stop. Linda wasn't enforcing rules. She was running a shakedown dressed up in suburban stationery. So I went digging. County clerk's office. No HOA registered anywhere near Maple Glen. Got the stamped proof, folded it into my pocket like armor. Walking back to my truck, I spotted a sedan idling 2 rows over. Couldn't see the driver's face, but the car peeled away the second I turned my head. That itch in the back of my skull told me everything I needed. I could have marched across the street right then, shoved the letter in Linda's face, and watched her little empire collapse. But I knew her type. Bullies don't quit when cornered. They just find another victim. No, I needed more than a warning. I needed a reckoning. So I opened a dusty box in my garage. Inside was my old life. Covert cameras no bigger than shirt buttons, recorders the size of coins, motion sensors. Legal to own, but not exactly the kind of thing your average homeowner keeps next to the rake. By sunset, my house was wired. Cameras tucked under the eaves, a mic hidden in the button of my flannel, and on my wrist, a sleek little band that worked like a panic button. 2 taps, and it streamed everything straight to my old lieutenant, Ray Diaz. I brought Hank in quietly, told him if anything happened, just film from his porch. The young couple next door agreed too, though they looked scared. And I made one more call to Boone, a former officer built like a brick wall, the kind of guy who never needed to ask why. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for Linda to make her move. And sure enough, she didn't keep me waiting. One gray morning, a black SUV rolled up in front of my house. Out stepped two men in knockoff uniforms, shields shiny but wrong, patches mismatched, belts heavy with fake gear. And behind them, Linda herself, chin high, clipboard tucked under her arm like a queen's scepter. The bigger one pounded on my door. "We have a warrant for your arrest," he barked, shoving a paper at me. The seal was fake. The judge's name belonged to a man who'd retired years ago. "All this over a trash can?" I asked. Linda smirked. "You were warned, Mr. Rowe. Maple Glen doesn't tolerate lawbreakers. Comply, or we do this the hard way." Neighbors peeked through blinds. Phones lifted. I raised my hand slowly. "No trouble," I said. "I'll comply." Their shoulders relaxed. They thought they owned the stage. The cuffs at my wrists, cheap and too tight, but I didn't flinch. I just turned to Linda and gave her the faintest smile, the kind that says, "You have no idea what you've just done." As they marched me to the SUV, I stumbled just enough to plant a tracker under the bumper. 2 taps on my wristband, and I knew Ray was watching. The SUV reeked of fast food and sweat. Amateurs. They muttered about taking me to a warehouse off Miller Road, keeping me quiet until it's done. Every word went straight into the recorder in my shirt. When we pulled up at the warehouse, I caught sight of Boone's sedan 2 blocks back, headlights flashing once. Right on schedule. Inside, they shoved me into a chair, cuffs clanging against metal. One of them hissed, "We wait for her call. Then we make sure you don't cause any more trouble." I smiled. "You boys ever done time?" Because impersonating cops and kidnapping? That's 20 years easy. The wiry one twitched, pacing. Outside, headlights swept across the cracks in the bay door. Then a booming voice shattered the silence. "This is the sheriff's office. The building is surrounded. Step out with your hands up." The big guy's eyes went wide. The wiry one cursed, fumbling at a padlock. I rattled my cuffs and said softly, "Tick-tock, boys. That's the sound of your time running out." Moments later, the bay door burst open. Floodlights poured in. Boone was a mountain in body armor, Ray at his side barking commands. The wiry man hit the ground. The big one shook, pistol trembling in his hand, until finally it clattered to the floor. In minutes, it was over. Boone cuffed him properly this time. Ray freed me, rubbing circulation back into my wrists. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Never better, because now we've got everything we need to burn her little kingdom down." Inside the warehouse, the evidence was piled high, stacks of red slips, a printer dusted with crimson flakes, fake seals, envelopes of cash marked with neighbors' names, even a ledger in Linda's neat handwriting. Extortion disguised as order, intimidation dressed as rules. It wasn't just petty fines. It was a system. That evening, we rolled back into Maple Glen. Neighbors stood in small clusters, whispering, watching. Linda waited on her porch, arms crossed, that bloodless smile back in place. "What is the meaning of this circus?" she snapped. "I'm the president of the Maple Glen HOA. You have no authority here." Ray stepped forward. "Linda Harrow, you're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, kidnapping, extortion, and fraud." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda laughed bitterly. "This is absurd. I hired those men for security. I was protecting this neighborhood." I stepped forward, holding up the ledger with her handwriting plain as day. "You forged fines, threatened families, and kidnapped me from my porch. That's not security, Linda. That's tyranny." For the first time, her mask cracked. Her eyes flicked, panic bleeding through. Neighbors spoke up, the Morales family, their voices shaking as they told how she'd threatened liens on their home. Hank bellowed about being fined for a garden gnome. The crowd's fear gave way to anger. And Linda, who once ruled with silence, stood alone in the noise. When the cuffs snapped shut on her wrists, she shrieked about injustice, promising we'd all regret it. But nobody cheered, nobody clapped. The silence of the block was louder than applause. Her trial dragged on for months. She tried to play the martyr, her lawyer twisting every piece of evidence. But the recordings, the ledger, the testimony, it was too much. The jury found her guilty on all counts. 15 years federal. Maple Glen began to heal. Hank put his gnome back on the lawn, proud as a trophy. The Morales kids strung up holiday lights without fear of fines. People lingered on porches, waved longer, talked more. And me? I sat back on my porch with coffee in hand, watching the street breathe again. The silence had returned. Not the brutal quiet of intimidation, but the peace that comes when people stand up together. I still keep one of her forged badges under glass on my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Authority isn't a title or a clipboard. It's trust. And no bully, no matter how polished, gets to take that away. So now I gotta ask you, what do you think? Was justice served, or did the system go too far? Have you ever had a neighbor who tried to control more than their share? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who's lived through HOA drama. And let's see where you stand on the line between order and tyranny. Because sometimes the quietest streets hide the loudest battles.